One factor that has certainly changed housing or housing markets in cities is the rise of Airbnb, and that well before the pandemic as well. And we have now Chris Lehane with us to talk to us about Airbnb and its time during the pandemic. Chris Lehane is the head of policy at Airbnb. Chris, welcome to Berlin Questions.
Sumi, thank you so much for having me. Let me apologize at the front that A, I'm not there in person, and B, not speaking in German. If I was speaking in German, it would begin with Guten and end with Morgen, and it would be a very brief conversation. Let me also just acknowledge, we're having this conversation while we're still in the midst of the challenges from COVID. Certainly hope everyone is safe and sound out there, your loved ones are. And also in particular, I want to acknowledge that Germany's been going through some real challenges, both with COVID, but also with the impact of climate, and our thoughts are with you. It is a real honor to be here. I want to thank the mayor of the city of Berlin for organizing this incredibly important conversation. And also want to do a shout out to my good friend Burkhard and Visit Berlin, which have really organized and curated this conversation. I've gotten to know Burkhard over the last 4 or 5 years. He is both a true Renaissance man, but also someone who's just an incredible advocate for the city and the people of Berlin. So really honored to be here. If we could go to the deck, that would be really helpful. I can't tell if it is up or not, but I assume it is up. What I'd like to begin is really a conversation about how we can think about rebalancing travel. We are in a moment where it's incredibly important we think about this and that we do it together. So if we go to the next slide, I want to begin this conversation. The next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. What I'd like to begin is talking about the 3 interrelated trends that we really see driving new travel. And those 3 trends are travel, work, living are all really blurring together. There's a growing awareness of how important travel is to human connections. And then third, how we're thinking about creating a healthier version or model for travel. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to touch on each of these pretty quickly. When it comes to travel, work, living, blurring, travel is really evolving from something that may have been more of a consumer activity into something that's becoming more of a way that people are actually living. And you see that really then driving some pretty significant market shifts within the sector. First of all, you have the fact that remote work from home is allowing people to do longer term stays wherever they may be visiting. On Airbnb at different times of the year, about 25% of our stays where people stay in 30 days or more. Secondly, you have a real focus on travel built around and organized around family and friends. That's leading to a market shift away from traditional accommodations and more to a focus on homes, whole homes, because they really do optimize for that type of an experience. And then the third is the growth of rural travel. You've seen a market shift away from business travel to nature travel. Again, nature helps really enhance the experience of connections. And so really big takeaway from all of this, and you can see it here in Germany, the travel is really evolving. You've had more people on the Baltic Sea coast this summer than in the city of Berlin on Airbnb. And then the third area where we're really seeing, next slide, please, travel really changing is a growing awareness that needs to be healthier, that needs to serve communities better. That means that travel, ultimately needs to be more local. It needs to be more authentic and benefiting more people. And it also needs to be sustainable. And that sustainability piece needs to come really, really fast. Obviously, everyone saw the IPCC report this month. And as I referenced earlier, obviously, Germany is dealing with some of these issues in a real way. Not surprisingly, when we polled folks in Berlin, we found that around half the people of Berlin want to incorporate sustainability into their travel decisions. So if we go to the next slide, please. And so as we think about a healthier form of travel. What we're really focused on is thinking about this in the same way and in the same sense that some have thought about natural resources, that we need to think about how we preserve what is really important, how we use it in a smart and responsible way. And next slide, please. And at Airbnb, we think about this almost in the following construct. Can there be healthy travel, and is there unhealthy travel? And no place in the world has done a better job of thinking about stakeholder economics, holistic solutions to a whole array of issues than Germany. This very conference is dedicated to actually thinking about the future and having those conversations. And so from the Airbnb perspective, when we think about healthy travel, there's really 5 elements that go into it. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And those 5 elements are, is that travel local? Is it authentic? Is it inclusive? Is it distributed? Is it sustainable? That's how we think about it on the Airbnb side. So if we go to the next slide, please. And over the course of the pandemic, as we saw these trends emerging, as we began to think about the impact that we're having, how we can think about healthy travel, we built an actual platform within Airbnb called the Airbnb City Portal. And the City Portal is really designed to allow governments, whether it's a city government or a national government, to integrate directly into the Airbnb platform so as they can advance their specific vision or version of a healthier model for travel. When we launched it at the beginning of the year, we committed to putting this in 100 cities around the world. As of September, we'll already be at that 100 number. And within that, we had committed to doing 50 markets in Europe. And right now, as we stand here today, we're in 35 markets in Europe. And we, in particular, would very much welcome the opportunity to be able to advance the City Portal into the great city of Berlin, but build it in a collaborative way and do it in a way that addresses some of the very specific policy issues and policy needs that have been identified by the city. So if we go to the next slide. So in that context, and in the spirit of a conference that is really about thinking about the future, thinking about commitments and questions that can be posed, commitments that can be made, today we want to make 5 commitments to help support a healthier travel model for Berlin. In making these commitments, I really want to underscore that ultimately it's up to government to lead on this, and it's a responsibility of platforms to support governments. But again, in the spirit of this conference, wanted to offer these 5 commitments. So next slide, please. Commitment number 1 is to work collaboratively with the city to build an online registration system. Such a system would be designed to allow the city to effectively administer its prevailing and ongoing regulations, and in particular, to be able to protect housing. Now, we've done more than 1,000 plus regulatory frameworks around the world. Many of those include this kind of an online registration system. They work. We just recently rolled this out in Greece, in the Netherlands, and in France. Next slide, please. Commitment number 2 is to really work closely with the city to make sure that the economic engine that Airbnb is driving is really supporting the people at a local level. And so the commitment is to use the City Portal to share neighborhood level data about the economic impact of Airbnb on particular neighborhoods, therefore giving the city the visibility, the information to be able to leverage that data to make sure the economics stay as local as possible. On Airbnb, the vast majority, the economics go to the hosts and stay in the communities. And we want to make sure that we're providing that knowledge, that information, and those tools to the city. Commitment number 3, if we go to the next slide, please. Commitment number 3 is to really work to distribute travel, to redistribute travel. And our commitment is to work with Visit Berlin and the city to redistribute travel. We can do that in 3 ways. We can either do it seasonality. We know Berliners would like to see less travel in the peak and spread it out over the course of the year. We can do it by making travel longer with less people. So people staying longer, but less people overall coming to the city. And the third way, we could even work with the city to redistribute travel from Berlin to other parts of Germany. We've done 100 plus partnerships with DMOs, the travel entities representing cities around the world, and many of them have been focused on this redistribution. Next slide, please. Commitment 4 is to really work to help protect and promote the quality of life at the neighborhood level. We are today announcing that we're introducing a neighborhood hotline, the Good Neighbor tool, in Berlin and across Germany. This follows on a policy that we announced last year to ban party houses all across the world. We've taken down almost 3,000 listings, stopped 400,000 reservations from taking place. It's really important to us that we help protect and promote the quality of life in neighborhoods. And the last commitment, commitment number 5, is all around innovation. We commit to working with the city of Berlin to promote innovations in its travel model. In particular, I think a great area for us to potentially work together on would be green stays. Airbnb rolls out innovations almost every day. There's a ton of tools on the platform that we can use in a bespoke way to support innovations at the local level, and we really look forward to doing that. But really bringing this to a conclusion and stepping back for a moment, what all of this adds up to is a commitment from us to work with cities like Berlin to promote a new vision of travel, a rebalanced vision of travel. It will take all of us to do that together. And as we think about that, it's obviously incredibly important to get this right for the sector, important for a city like Berlin, but really important for humanity. At the end of the day, we're in a time period where the world is closing in. Travel has always played a critical role in connecting people, those people-to-people connections. We absolutely need to be able to have those connections if we're going to take on issues like climate, like economic inequality, like polarization. Travel plays a critical role in that. And so it's really important for us, for all of us, to make sure we get this right. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's an honor, and I look forward to any follow-up questions.
Thanks, Chris. We have just a very short window to ask you some follow-up questions, and I'll ask straight away. You talked about the commitments to Berlin, healthy travel. I want to ask about healthy ecosystems in cities. The economic impact you're saying that you want to offset. What about the economic impact that has already been created? And I know that you know well some of the criticisms there are of Airbnb. I'll just list them: making cities unaffordable, pushing up rents, exacerbating inequality, making it impossible for young people and lower income people to remain in cities. How is Airbnb working to be a part of the solution of that impact that's already been created?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I glossed over it pretty quickly given the time. But just in terms of the economic impact, right? The vast majority of the economics that are generated by the Airbnb platform, do actually stay in the city. We're different than other models in the sense that we are democratizing capitalism. The hosts make the overwhelming chunk of the money, up to 97% of the money that comes through. The majority of it stays in the actual neighborhoods. I shared some data on the deck. I didn't speak to it directly, but for every 1,000 guests that show up in a city, this is from an Oxford economics study, we generate 9 jobs directly. They over-index on the retail and restaurant industry. The velocity and multiplier of those dollars or euros move around really quickly because the typical people getting this money are hosts, are everyday folks. In Berlin, I think around a quarter of them are teachers or in the healthcare space. About a quarter of them actually would not be able to stay in their homes, but for the economics that Airbnb generates for them. And then if you just look at our overall level of where we are, typically in most of our most penetrated cities, we're at 1% or less of the overall housing stock. Nonetheless, I think your central question is right on point, which is you're either part of the problem to a challenge out there or part of the solution. And amongst the reasons that we have worked to really put in place those 1,000+ policy frameworks around the world is to really work with different cities to address their specific concerns. Some places in the world don't want any short-term rentals taking place in anything other than someone's primary home. Many of the frameworks we have actually accomplish that. There are some parts of the world that actually want to have more because travel and tourism has been valued as an incredibly important part of their economy, and we work with those. at the end of the day, our offer and our commitment is really to work with cities to come up with frameworks that meet the specific needs of that particular city.
I'll ask you about Berlin because you did make those 5 commitments to Berlin in your presentation.
Yes.
In 2016, we saw Berlin had as many Airbnb flats as real rental apartments, and that meant that the government here had to put a stop to it. Is that the type of regulatory approach you're talking about and working with cities?
Absolutely. I mean, we've done in many cities, and as this commitment spoke to, really want to, in Berlin, is to use the platform and allow the city to be able to integrate directly with the platform. So in the situation in Berlin, collaboratively allowing the city to engage directly with the Airbnb platform and therefore be in a position where it can enforce its laws. And in a city like Berlin, Airbnb listings would not be able to appear unless the city has actually given them the authority and approval and ability to do that. And now you accomplish that successfully by integrating the city directly onto the platform. I'm sitting here in San Francisco, and 5-6 years ago, San Francisco was a hotspot dealing with a very similar situation. We introduced an initial version of what eventually became the city portal, ended up taking down about 5,000 listings, which is a significant chunk of our listings in San Francisco, much smaller city population-wise and housing stock-wise than Berlin. And 5 or 6 years ago, the relationship between Airbnb and the city was challenged. Today, the city of San Francisco points to the city portal as having been incredibly successful in accomplishing what the city sought out to do, which is to be able to effectively administer its housing policies and enforce its housing policies. And by the way, at the end of the day, once that got put in place, issues around Airbnb in the city of San Francisco really diminished. And now we're in a place where everyday people are able to use the platform to generate that extra income. People who otherwise would not be able to afford to come visit San Francisco can do so. And the city is able to protect its housing stock in the way that it deemed appropriate.
That's all the time we have, Chris. Thank you for joining us for that conversation from San Francisco, and we wish you a good day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate the conversation.